Coming up on Theater Talk.
On a night like this, I start to wonder what life is all about.
And I always say two heads are better than one to figure it out.
From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins, and here with me is my guest co-host, Jesse Green, co-chief theater critic of the New York Times, and we are so delighted to be focusing right now on the wonderful revival of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Carousel at the Imperial Theater. We are joined by Billy Bigelow, Joshua Henry, Jesse Mueller, Julie Jordan, both Tony nominees this season, and Andy Einhorn, the musical supervisor of the production.
And we're clearly at the best piano bar in New York, right? That's right. So feel free to order some drinks.
Yes, tip your wait staff.
We wanted to focus today on the famous scene that concludes with the most famous song from the show, If I Loved You. But we're not, spoiler alert, we're probably not going to focus on the song so much itself as the incredible construction of this rather long scene. Actually, how long is the whole scene?
I think it's around 9 minutes.
Wow.
It's quite a monolithic piece of music. I mean, it's Shakespearean in its construction, as well as just the sort of heft and weight of how much time is given to this particular beat in the show.
You say monolithic, and yet one of the fascinating things about the construction, which you don't find a lot in Rodgers' music, maybe in South Pacific to some extent, and in Hammerstein's way of shaping the scene, is that it is built around lots of different cells,
Yes.
musical and also emotional, and we're going to talk about and sample some of each of those. Where does it begin? Where do you feel? Where does this scene actually start? What is the setup? What has just happened?
Two young mill workers go out for a night on the town, basically, and we go to the carousel that's visiting, and we see the barker, Billy Bigelow, and we have a little altercation with the lady that owns the carousel. She basically chases us out. So this scene happens almost directly after we've been chased out of the woods by Mrs. Mullen. All of a sudden, Billy shows up and he says, "All right, let's hang out. Which of you would like to stay with me?"
And Julie is the one that emerges and decides that she wants to stay.
Let me
And we know that, this is trouble, 'cause she's
Well, you've just lost your job.
I've just lost
Spoiler
my
alert.
job. And
I've
then-
basically lost my job because I said I'm going to stay.
Yeah.
And at that time, I would have. We talk about it in the scene. If I work at this mill, I also live there in the boarding house. So if I don't get home by the time the doors are closed, I'm out of a job. I'm out of a place to live. So the stakes are very high for everyone, but also very exciting.
So the beginning is kind of flirtatious. It's maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like the initial flirtation is coming from Billy. At least in terms of the dialogue. I don't know what's going on in terms of the emotion.
Yeah, I think Billy is on the prowl, so to speak. I mean, he's
Yeah.
Always.
yeah. You know, he steps away from the carousel, and so on a night like this, we're seeing what we can sort of
Right.
get away with.
And don't you think Billy's done this before, whereas
For
Julie
sure.
Jordan has not?
For sure.
Yes.
Well, so let's hear the bit of music and the introduction to this so-called bench scene in which we hear the beginning of this flirtation.
Tell me something. Ain't you scared of me? I mean, after what the cop said about me taking money from girls?
Oh, I ain't scared.
And your name? Julie. Julie something.
Julie Jordan.
You're a queer one, Julie Jordan. Ain't you sorry that you didn't run away? You can still go if you wanna.
I reckon that I care to choose to stay. You couldn't take my money if I didn't have any, and I don't have a penny, that's true. And if I did have money, you couldn't take any, 'cause you'd ask and I'd give it to you.
You're a queer one, Julie Jordan. Ain't you ever have a fella you give money to?
No,
Ain't you ever had a fella at all? Well, you must have had a fella you went walking with.
Yes.
Where you walk?
Nowhere special I recall.
In the woods.
No.
On a beach.
No.
Did you love him?
No. Never loved no one. I told you that.
You're a funny kid. You want to go into town and dance, maybe, or?
No, I have to be careful.
Of what?
My character. You see, I'm never going to marry. I'm never going to marry. If I was going to marry, I wouldn't have to be such a stickler. But I'm never going to marry, and a girl who don't marry has got to be much more particular.
So let's start at the beginning of that. You're a queer one, Julie Jordan. That's not the first time we've heard that phrase
Correct.
musically or lyrically in the show. It was sung earlier by another character.
Yeah, the character Carrie Pipperidge. So Julie's best friend, the two girls that are sort of in the woods together, being like, what do we do?
So that's one of the motifs that we were talking about that we hear. But that section that you just sang has 3 or 4 different cells that will recur again in the song. Maybe, Andy, you can speak to how Rodgers did the job of fitting them together so that they don't sound like 10 different things, but one thing.
Actually, I think there was a real definite homage to the operetta tradition in the construction of a lot of the pieces in this show, because where something like South Pacific or Sound of Music, you saw a definite 32-bar song structure, and this is actually defying that, especially in this intro. And the musical geek in me is so fascinated by this very beginning of the section, because interestingly he keeps actually raising the tension through these characters flirting with one another actually by raising the key.
Yeah.
So actually you have that first key that they're sitting in G major, and then as each one of them raise one another, it ends up going up a half step until a certain point where what I love about Julie is she keeps cadencing the phrases, and so I think there's a really...
Can you demonstrate
Sure,
kind of what
absolutely.
cadencing
Yeah,
means?
well, cadence-
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I
that's something we
think,
talked
for
about in
instance,
rehearsal.
you know, when he sings, you can still go if you wanna. She sings, I reckon that I care to choose to stay.
brings it back.
Putting a button on
Yeah.
it. But she's actually, it's a rather sort of classical, almost Mozartian tradition
Right.
to say, I'm gonna go and 2, 5, 1, and put this button on it so that it gives it a sense of actually grounding so that she can go on with her thought.
One of the other things I love in this, while we're getting all geeky techy, is there's a wonderful kind of worm turn figure, a chromatic thing that goes on that like really literally ratchets up the tension on those lines like,
Yeah, when he sings that.
have you never had a fella you...
Julie Jordan, ain't you ever had a fella you give money to?
No,
And I think what's really interesting is it's that sort of sinewy nature of really getting under her skin.
And does the music help you find what's going on?
It really
at that moment?
informs the flirtation there, you know, the real question there. I mean, no one really wants to give away their hand,
Right.
you know, so what are you about? And that chromatic question in the music really informs what I have to do.
We're going to maybe skip a little here. There's one of the motifs coming up, also heard earlier in the show, brings us into the question of what would it be like if you fell in love. This is, and I've always thought of this as the sound of the loom.
It is. It's that
That spinning, that
repetitive,
whirring.
Swirling figure.
Can you
Sure, it's this.
favor us with it?
It's this idea of this sort of. It's musically painting the sound of the loom.
And can we hear
Absolutely.
what Julie is
The
singing?
little section that goes into the
Yes,
chirp.
Yeah.
When I worked in the mill, weaving at the loom, I gaze absent-minded at the roof. And half the time the shuttle would tangle in the threads, and the warp would get mixed with the woof. If I loved you.
But you don't.
She says, no, I don't.
So we get the name of the song,
Yeah, right? You set the idea up.
set
What's
the idea
happening
up,
in the
then
music?
seem to pull back from it,
Yeah.
and then we get a chorus.
The delight in the trick is sort of, for me, to sort of like slip it in and not feel like you're announcing a song.
So let's hear that.
But somehow I can see just exactly how I'd be if I loved you. Time and again I would try to say all I'd want you to know.
And I think she ends it on a, oh God,
Oh.
I said too much. You know? She kind of goes, oh wait, I mean if I loved you. One of the things Jack O'Brien was so helpful with in rehearsal is with me, and we were talking about Julie, and he just kept talking about the immediacy of her. She's so kind of like right there. And it's interesting, the thing I also love about this scene is just how frank they are with each other. They're strangers. And they have so much to risk, so much, I mean, possibly so much to gain, but also maybe so much to lose, but they're just so open with each other, sort of shockingly so, and the things that they say to one another. And then, like we were saying, this lyric gets introduced about if I love you, this idea, and she says what she thinks it would be like. And then Billy takes on that lyric, and to me, it's just that wonderful moment of you look at someone and you go, oh my God, I'm not alone. Like, you think about it the way I kind of think about it. Maybe I'm not crazy.
And that is really underlined after you sing your chorus. We then get more of the operetta development of the scene using, again, many of these same cells with one big additional one, this time mostly from Billy's point of view.
This is actually one of my favorite parts of the bench scene when we get this unlocking of who Billy is, sort of when we realize that Billy's actually a poet inside, and it goes to that great Hammerstein place where the imagery becomes about the sky and the sea and how we're all meeting together. But I think it's a really interesting, very worldly view for a character that up to this point we've not seen anything like this out of him.
Well, let's recall that it is drawn from a play by Franz Mueller that is very cosmic and philosophical, and beautifully condensed into what this 32-bar section here, which we'll hear.
You can't hear a sound, not the turn of a leaf, nor the fall of a wave hitting the sand. The tide's creeping up on the beach like a thief, afraid to be caught stealing the land. On a night like this, I start to wonder what life is all about.
And I always say 2 heads are better than 1 to figure it out.
Jumping ahead, we go through, Billy has that cell and a few more that are also based on the other, and then we get to the loom theme again, only now from your point of view with a different story of what love would be. And the main chorus, second chorus of the song. So let's hear the final chorus.
But somehow I can see just exactly how I'd be if I loved you. Time and again I would try to say all I'd want you to know. If I loved you, words wouldn't come in an easy way. Round in circles I'd go, longing to tell you, but afraid and shy. I'd let my golden chances pass me by. Soon you'd leave me, off you would go in the mist of day. Never, never to know I loved you. If I loved you.
Well, and there's not as
I get to listen to that every night. Just stand there and be like,
That was so astonishingly wonderful. I can't begin to react, which
She's
is
done. She's like,
overwhelming.
One quick final question. Is it possible, can you ever get tired of singing that?
No, I mean, for me as a singer and an actor, it's such a blessing to have stuff like this because you can continue to dig and find things and you know what I mean. And when you get to do something like this and play off of someone and play off of someone like Josh, that's half the fun of it. It's like, what's going to happen tonight? You know?
It's different every night.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you all so much for taking of your time to come over here today and do this.
And
for us.
perform tonight.
Perform tonight. Jesse Mueller, back again. Thank you so much. Joshua Henry and Andy Einhorn, thank you so much. Can't get better than that. Now here with me again is Jason Zinoman, a critic at the New York Times who writes about both theater and comedy, and also he is the author of Letterman, The Last Giant of Late Night, which is just about out on paperback.
That's right.
That's right, that's right. And in the hot seat is my sometimes guest co-host, Jesse Green, co-chief theater critic of the New York Times. And we had you in today because you wrote a wonderful think piece in this week's New York Times, The Agony and the Ecstasy of Writing Negative Reviews.
Well, I didn't mean to write a wonderful think piece. I meant to write a terrible think piece.
Well, a pensive think piece, and this was inspired, as it happens, not that you haven't written other negative reviews, but by a negative review you wrote of Escape to Margaritaville, a Jimmy Buffett musical that just opened on Broadway, which you did not like.
I didn't like it, and I wrote a very straight-ahead pan. Not a negative review, a pan. We all get the difference, you know. I would say it maybe was all the way over to scathing. I'm not sure. But what happened is, of course, there were tons of comments. Jimmy Buffett has a huge fan base. He's, you know, one of the most successful singer-songwriters of our time. Got to give him credit for that. And his fans are called parrot heads, and they were none too pleased. And let it be known, as is their right, often in comments on the Times website and elsewhere. And so the editors thought, well, you know, when we have an audience engaged in this way, let's keep them engaged and provoke them further. So they asked me to put myself on the line.
You told me that people also tweeted you saying, oh, why don't you chill out and have a drink, and things like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that's happened because of social media and because of the lessening of the understanding of the framework of criticism and what critics do and how a review by a professional journalist is different from an opinion you might have on anyone might have, which is quite valid. But they're different things, and you get a kind of response that is as if you actually came to their home and murdered their dog.
And attacked them, yes.
No, their pet.
Yeah.
It's worse than if you attacked them. And they feel that they need to respond in kind to kind of balance things out.
So, Jason, what is the responsibility of a critic? What is the responsibility of a for real critic? You know.
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, people should read this story.
Yes.
Jesse wrote a great piece, and I think it's more necessary than ever before because in a lot of ways, I think negative criticism is under threat, and critics are increasingly, I'd be curious to hear if you agree with that, but are incentivized away from writing that kind of review. But I think, you know, Jesse articulated it really well, which is criticism is a branch of journalism. It's a pursuit of truth, and in this case, you and I'm paraphrasing, but you're reporting on your own thoughts and feelings. If you lied about your own thoughts and feelings, if to avoid criticism, or to be more diplomatic, or to do whatever, people are going to stop trusting you. And when people don't trust you to report accurately on your own feelings, you're useless as a critic.
Also, I think something that's begun to disappear is the idea that you can enjoy reading opinions that differ from your own and in fact learn from them. Not necessarily, no one who loves Margaritaville is going to learn to hate it because they read my pan. But if they read enough of my reviews, they'll know kind of what my take is on things, and it will help them define their own taste. Or if I do my job well, it can. I grew up reading a lot of critics, some of whom wrote loathsome stuff. John Simon is an example. And I would read that stuff, some of it virulently homophobic, and I was a little gay boy, and I still ate it up. I understood where
he's
he
a
was
good writer,
coming
yeah.
from, and he was such a good writer.
He is a good writer.
I could put that in a context and learn from him, even though I disagreed with him. That seems to be disappearing. And you mentioned disincentivizing very negative reviews, the social atmosphere, and that is something I totally feel because I'm a snowflake. I really oughtn't to be a critic because I'm so thin-skinned, and because a lot of the people out there are now, in essence, Trump.
But that was a bold thing that you said in the piece, and I've heard you say this before, that you're thin-skinned, which for a critic is sort of a transgressive thing to confess to. Because, in particular, look, Jesse won't say this because he's, believes you dish out, you could take it, but being the chief theater critic of the New York Times, you've always taken a huge amount of heat.
Yes.
A huge amount of heat from all sorts of different kinds of people. But now, in the age of social media, I can't even imagine the amount of heat you take on an average review.
Well, I don't, honestly, I try to limit what I take in from that because it's not helpful. The smartest responses won't be phrased in those ways. So I get those via an email or sometimes on my Facebook page, although they found my Facebook page now, and that's filled with, you and your Yale degree talking down to us. It's like, oh, please.
Talking down to us. I have to say, I think you like Margaritaville better than I did, but
well, what's your pan?
Well, no, I mean, my pan's not interesting because I'm not in your position, except to say that I think it's so important that you're doing what you're doing in an age where so many people are operating below the level of their own intelligence to make a buck, and that's a problem.
I do want to say that I don't tend toward the scathing when something's just bad. When something's bad, but I can appreciate the intentions of the author or the artists, or there's mitigating factors of some kind, for me, I will look for those things to say as well as genuinely criticizing. But when I get the whiff, as I got a very powerful alcoholic whiff off of Margaritaville, of cynicism, it puts things into a different category. I am not obligated to promote the business of Broadway. Look, many people will love the show.
Yes.
That has to be acknowledged, and they should. I'm not troubled by people enjoying things I don't like. I wonder why they're so troubled about my not enjoying something they do like.
But I think it's also worth mentioning, and Jesse does, that, look, negative reviews sting, and artists spend years putting this stuff together. Critics, and Jesse is, one of them, shouldn't take this lightly, and he doesn't. And some critics have not, over the years, have said they don't think about this, but I know it's true. It also has an impact on box office. This is a heavy responsibility to write reviews for a place like the New York Times. That said, it doesn't mean we don't have an obligation to write if we don't write negative reviews, then you can't trust what we're going to say.
Yeah, I feel worse about reviews that come from the New York Times. I'm not going to name names, but where there's a work which I feel comes from the soul of the artist, and then it doesn't work out, and then you're obligated to not like it. Whereas I didn't feel that this musical Margaritaville was coming. The heartfelt song Margaritaville perhaps comes from Jimmy Buffett's soul, but I didn't feel that the show
it's a corporate creation of the enterprise that creates resorts and all kinds of other things around the world. And good for them. He has a net worth of $500 million or something like that. I don't know why all these people are so furious about the potential that some extra million might not come to him because of my review. But be that as it may, no one is saying you can't enjoy this show. I'm just telling you I didn't. Here's why. And you can place yourself on the rainbow of appreciation based on knowing where I am.
You were on the end of this because you were assigned by the New York Times to write the review for Hugh Jackman in The Last Showman.
Or The Greatest Showman.
The Greatest Showman, which I think you dealt with very decorously, but you didn't particularly like it. You did not particularly like it, and I think you heard about that, didn't you?
Oh yeah, I mean the thing is, I wrote a negative review of The Greatest Showman, and like a lot of critics. And the review became a massive hit, and people loved it. The movie, I'm sorry, gave a massive hit. And the Times actually wrote a story about the kind of incongruity between the critical reception and the audience reception. And I got some letters I got one letter from a incredibly articulate high school student in New York who said, at my high school they teach you that art matters, and I read your review of The Greatest Showman, and you clearly are not capable of understanding how great this was. And then she excoriated me very articulately for 2 pages. And at the end of it, it was moving to me. And I thought, I did my job. Because as Jesse says in his piece, fighting about art is part not only is part of the fun of it, but it shows that there's something serious at stake. Here was a person who cared so passionately about hating my review that she not only wrote this response, but sort of defined her own aesthetic in opposition to mine, which is exactly how it should work.
Many people wrote to me complaining about something they feel a critic ought to do that I did not do, which is to report on the response of other people in the audience. So you've gotten these emails and things like that where they say, well, everybody else in the audience was having a good time. They were standing up at the end, spontaneous standing ovations and laughing like crazy throughout the whole thing, and you ignored all of that. Now, but let's look at that for a second. I'd like to ask Jason, because I don't know what the answer is. What do you feel about that criticism?
I think if that was our job, we would just be reporters reporting what the audience said. We would have no use. I mean, I'd be curious, because this is to your point. One of the many kind of interesting, provocative lines you is your kicker, the last line, where you say the job is to be a theater snob, which is, I think, in this age, actually a very bold thing to say.
Yes, my editor called me and he said, I love this piece. Are you sure you want to say that as your last line? And I said, is there something wrong with it? He said, no, it's very strong, but you're going to have that hung around your neck for the rest of your life. And he's right.
More power to you, Jesse Green, co-chief theater critic of the New York Times. It's so lovely to see you, Jesse.
Nice to be on this side of the table.
Thank you, Jason. I look forward to the return of both of you very soon. Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Corey and Bob Dinelli Charitable Fund, the Noel Coward Foundation, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you,